Hey everyone, Royalivi here and welcome to my MLS scouting video for the 2022 season. This will be split into two parts. Part 1 we're going to be looking at goalkeepers and defenders as well as a few other things, and part 2 will primarily be looking at midfielders and forwards, so make sure you subscribe to stick around for part 2 if you enjoy part 1. Now, I joined SORARE in early January 2021, so right during the middle of the last MLS off-season, so I can sort of recall a bit how the prices have changed over time and over the last year, and today I'm going to be looking at some options I'll be considering for my America Rare squad next season. Now, anything I say in this video can likely carry over into limited cards, but just be aware, everyone and everything I will be looking at will be against the rare versions of these cards, so just keep that in mind. And another thing to keep in mind when you're buying your players in the off-season is the price of Ethereum affecting how these players' prices relate in the coming months. For example, if you buy some players in December and then by March next year Ethereum has tripled in price, you're likely going to see your players have a drop in Ethereum value. Maybe their fiat value will rise a bit, but the Ethereum will likely drop, meaning it likely would have been a better choice to just hold the Ethereum over those few months and buy the players later. Now, obviously the opposite of this can be applied if Ethereum goes down in price between now and March, for example, so just something to calculate and consider when you're buying any players for a season 3 to 4 months away. Now, in terms of when is the best time to buy or invest in MLS players, I think your best bet is to just look at historic trends on SORARE. So for example, Sean Johnson here, a guaranteed starter for the last 2 seasons, so a good card to look at in terms of his SORARE data. Now, the MLS season ends around mid-November, so the price started trading off towards the end of the season and then hit its lowest point in the curve around mid-December to early January, so naturally that looks like the best time to buy your players about 3 months before the start of the season. Now, obviously you have to keep in mind this was the last off season and things could be different this time around, but history often finds a way of repeating itself, so I would wager this would be the best time to buy. We can then see Sean Johnson here started to rise a bit in late January, early February, and then in the middle of February is when his price started rocketing up heading into the season, so I expect to see similar trends going on this year. Now, it is worth noting, however, that the last MLS season was delayed by a month, so potentially player prices might rise a tad earlier this year, and you can also see Sean Johnson was rising heavily and hitting the top of his price curve around March last year, which was when there was the biggest hype around SORARE in terms of market valuations that I've ever seen on the game actually so far. So March and April were monster months in regards to player prices. There was a lot of hype and a major influx of new users into the game, so you know, just because last year Sean Johnson could be bought for 0.1 Ethereum in December and then could be sold for 0.5 Ethereum in March, don't think that a profit margin of that caliber is going to repeat itself again. You never know, it could, but it is unlikely. So come March 2022, don't be mad at me if you're not making 5 times profit on all of your players. As I said, March was a bit of a beast of a month, so I think the price curve will definitely be a bit lower come next March, but I'm sure the players will follow a similar albeit slightly smaller trend. And you can then see when the season starts is when Johnson's price started trailing off a bit, probably also in conjunction with the March hype decreasing a bit and the prices just naturally correcting themselves, but it looks to be a case of players being at their peak price heading into the start of the season, and then naturally as the season progresses the price slowly drops across the season as there's less games to be played. Again, this is all dependent on the price of Ethereum as well, but in fiat terms it seems logical that players' price will trail off over the season. Now that I've got all of that out the way, I'm going to be looking into what players I've identified as options for myself, and obviously anyone watching this video. I'm going to try and look at cheap bargain players as well as some young prospects. I'll also consider the tried and true players who are more trusted in the league. Obviously they'll be more expensive, but overall a mixed bag of players I'll be going over, so let's get right into it. Looking at the goalkeepers, I'm going to start off by looking at 2 slightly riskier options. You know, they're both cheap right now. If they become number 1 of their club next season, you can expect to see a very decent profit on these cards, and that's James Pantimis of Montreal and Michael Nelson of Houston Dynamo. Now, you can see the current prices for these players on the screen, so much cheaper than your regular starting goalkeepers, of course, so that's where the risk is. James Pantimis had a decent chunk of last season as Montreal's number 1 before Sebastian Brazier came in on loan and sort of usurped him as the number 1 spot, causing a drop in Pantimis' price. Now, doing a bit of investigation through transfer marks, I can see Breeze's loan is up after this season, giving me cause to believe Pantimis could return to the number 1 spot. Now, Breeze's parent club, Bologna, and Montreal are owned by the same entity, so there's probably a decent chance Breeze returns for another year on loan at Montreal perhaps. But I think the price of Pantimis at the moment, it's certainly worth the risk. He's a young keeper and has another year left on his deal, so for the Ethereum price right now, I don't think you can knock this as a risk. Similar story with Michael Nelson of Houston. Terrible season for Houston, but Michael Nelson Nelson towards the final third of the season was a shining light for the club. He became the #1 keeper. Good things have been said about him, and he's a local Houston lad, so seems like a great fit for the club. The issue here is that both Nelson and his competitor in goal, Marko Maric, have their contracts finishing at the end of this season. So the risk is, will Nelson sign a new deal, and will he become the starting keeper for Houston or not? I think he's in good stead to do so. He's done well, but Marko Maric is also a solid keeper. So at under 0.05 Ethereum, Michael Nelson is a really cheap option who, if he does start playing as the #1 next season, could definitely go up a lot in price. Really cheap, but a good gamble if he does get the #1 spot next year, so definitely think it's worth looking into him and seeing if you want to pick one up. Now, looking forward at some other options, we want to consider the all-round score these keepers are scoring as well to really boost the additional points they get each week, so we need to look at SORARE data for this. Now, Slonina here has been the starting keeper for Chicago Fire for the final third of the season at just 17 years old, so it's no surprise his price is massive. He's seemingly more suited for an under-23 squad than an America squad, but if you have the Ethereum, he's certainly an option to consider at such a young age with such good all-round scores. Similar with Matt Turner, great scoring keeper, but his rise into the US national team and his impressive performances have hiked his price up a lot, so I think you can get equally scoring players for a much lesser price. So let's look at a few examples here. We've got JT Martinowski, the starter for Quakes, and Jonathan Bond, the starter for LA Galaxy. Both score pretty decently regarding all-round scores. Both are young starting keepers, so you'll get a lot of future use out of them for reasonable prices at the moment. The only issue is both players have their contracts up this season, but after being guaranteed starters for the last year in their teams, you'd expect them to sign new deals and continue as the #1, so I definitely consider these two keepers as good all-round scoring players to potentially add. And then some more safer options for similar prices are Yarborough, Sean Johnson and Bill Hamid. Again, all #1 starting keepers, but they have at least another year left on their deals, whereas Marcinowski and Jonathan Bond don't. Now, Bill Hamid has struggled with a few injuries last season, but he has regained his #1 spot at DC United. Yarborough is a bit older than some of the other options I've suggested, being 33 when the season starts, but he has been the Colorado starter for the last year and has another 2 years left on his deal, so I can't really see him not being their starter next season. He'll be a good solid option to have. And Sean Johnson is the captain and starter for New York City. He did miss some games last season due to being in the Gold Cup US squad, but I think that just signifies that he's a really solid keeper there, and he's definitely an option to consider for the next few years in your America teams. Now let's move on and look at some defenders I'm considering. You can often get similar scoring defenders for quite cheap here, but there are also some more expensive options that are more of a sure thing to be a consistent scorer next season, so definitely worth looking at Kai Wagner and Walker Zimmerman. As I said, both are a lot more expensive in comparison to the other options available due to how consistently well they score. Both get great all-round scores and are guaranteed starters when fit. Zimmerman did deal with some injuries a bit last season, but when he plays, he's obviously a really great player to have in your club. The only issue is both players come in at over 0.1 Ethereum, so that could take a decent chunk out of your budget right there if you go for them, but I just thought it's worth highlighting them as probably two of the best options in the league to consider if you've got the budget for it. Looking at some cheaper options, we've got Milton Valenzuela of Columbus Crew. Now, he has recovered from a long-term injury towards the end of last season, but due to the MLS season ending as he just got back into the squad, his price sort of hasn't rebounded yet, so assuming he stays fit and signs on to a new deal, I think he's a great cheap option right now to look into for next season. I even recently went out and picked up his super rare card on my SORARE Road to Glory series, so I'm hoping and anticipating a big year for Milton next season. And another player who's looking a bit undervalued to me currently is Danny Wilson of Colorado. He is contracted for another year and consistently plays for the team, getting some great all-round scores as you can see from his last 5 fixtures. Yet, if you look on the market, he's coming in at a relatively low price during this off-season, so definitely think he's another one you can consider as a cheapish option, along with two other options in Sean Nealis and Gonzalez Perez. Now, Sean Nealis has really come through in Aaron Long's absence at New York Red Bulls, so he's been essentially their leading centre-back for the last season. He's got 3 years left on his deal, and I'd expect him to remain a regular starter next season, likely alongside Aaron Long, who's coming back, so that will be a very sturdy defensive partnership that will be a very tough one to beat next season. And Gonzalez Perez is one of the best all-round scorers in the league in defence. You know, Inter and Miami haven't done great last season, but they've been slowly improving and picking things up, and if they can progress on this and become even better next season, I'm sure Gonzalez Perez will be a key part of that and continue to get great scores across the board, so that's a similar price to Sean Nealis. He's another one to look out for. And then I'm going to end on a youth player who I expect to hopefully get more game time next season, and that's Abubakar Keita of Columbus Crew. He's a great young prospect who got a sporadic amount of game time last season. Now, he does have to compete with some very decent centre-backs, but if you see a shuffle of players in the off-season or he just comes through really well, I expect him to be a great option to have in the club. So if you can get him for cheap, I would definitely consider doing so, as he could be one for the future. And that's going to conclude part 1 of my MLS scouting video. So we've looked at a variety of options here, a lot of whom I'm also looking at and hoping to pick up in the coming weeks to really pad out my America teams. I'm even looking at moving into the America Pro Division with some super rares next season, so make sure you subscribe to my channel to see how that goes come March on my SORARE Road to Glory series. And of course, do subscribe and watch out for part 2 of the MLS scouting series if you enjoyed this one. So give the video a like and do comment down below your thoughts, as well as any other good options you think people should consider. There's some great SORARE managers out there who watch and comment on my videos, so yeah, do share your insights and we'll see if we can help each other. And yeah, thanks for watching, darlings. I will catch you next time.